Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Are you all ready for some street talk when it comes to problem tenants and scammers? There's no stone unturned in this panel debate. Is that right, guys?
Yes.
I'm going to tell you how it is. Okay, so anyway, my name is Shamplina. Pleasure to be here. I am the founder of Landlord Action and the Chief Commercial Officer of Hamilton Fraser. I have been dealing with problem tenants only for 30 years. So it takes quite a lot to shock me. But I still get shocked every year, especially when I am filming my TV programme, Nightmare Tenant Slum Landlords, and they are generally the extreme cases. But we're going to touch on, obviously, today's debate, which is protecting yourself from tenant fraud. Just before we start, and before my panellists introduce themselves, how many of you have ever experienced a scamming, fraudulent tenant? Put your hand up. Okay, 2 people. Okay. So I am going to differentiate the type of scams that are out there, and more importantly, we are going to try and give you some golden nuggets to try and take away, because, look, your property is your asset, and the worst type of tenant to have, I say, is a serial bad tenant, albeit serial bad tenant stroke fraudulent tenant are the worst ones to get. They know the game. They know more and have more knowledge than most landlords they've rented from. So we're going to give you some tips, and we're going to have a debate, and then we're going to open up some questions. I want to make it quite free-flowing. So anyway, my guest to my left, Richard Blanco. Richard, please introduce yourself.
Hello, yes, my name is Richard Blanco, and I am one of the London representatives for the National Residential Landlords Association. We've got a stand down there today, so do come and say hello to us, and I'll be doing a couple of other talks as well. And I'm a portfolio landlord. I've got properties across 6 London boroughs, and I've been a landlord now for nearly 20 years. So mostly buying at auction, refurbishing, and then renting out. And I rent to a mixture of kind of families and sharers. And I've got HMOs, but they tend to be shared houses rather than by the room. So that's a bit about me.
A wealth of experience, and what a great landlord he is. Okay, I can vouch for that. Kristjan, Byfield, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone. My name's Kristjan Byford. As it says up there, I have a company called the Depositary, which is a tenancy conclusion software product for letting agents. But probably more relevant to this conversation, I've owned and operated.
Oh, can we close the window, the door? Thank you. Thank you.
I haven't owned and operated an airline.
Yeah.
I've owned and operated a London lettings agency for 17 and a half years. I've been an agent for over 20. And also, I've actually, and still am, a London tenant. I've been a tenant renting in London for nearly 24 years. So experiences on all sides of the spectrum there.
Okay. And of course, you never come across a bad agent, have you?
Never.
We might come to agents later on. And last but not least, Rowan, please introduce yourself.
Hi guys, my name is Rowan Lennox. I'm the Director of Operations at Homeppl, which is a tenant referencing provider. So we provide tenant referencing on behalf of some of the largest letting agents and build-to-rent companies in the UK. And our specialty is, as relevant to today, detecting fraud in tenant applications. So fraudulent documents, fraudulent references. We've seen fraudulent passports all the way through to fake companies and fake bank statements. So that's what we do, and really looking forward to talking more about fraud here today.
Great, okay. So, let's kick off. You market your property. In London, it's ultra competitive. I heard from David Cox today, who's the director of Rightmove, that the average rent is now over £2,000 a month in London. Okay, a lot of money. And to get into a property and trick your way into a property, it's a civil matter. It's not a criminal matter. And we know that we've come out of a pandemic of something unprecedented as COVID, and we'll touch on COVID and COVID fraud shortly. And the good fraudsters can long it out in a property for the best part of a year to 18 months, which is every landlord's nightmare, okay? So firstly, and this could be a shameless plug for you, Rowan, okay, we're going to talk about referencing. I see classic mistakes, and I'm sure you do, Richard, as, from being a landlord, and we do the circuit all the time, of landlords just desperate to put a tenant in their property. And one thing that you get with experience is a thing called gut feeling. But gut feeling alone won't guarantee that your rent's paid and you can pay your mortgage. So referencing is really important. So I wanted to get the referencing part out the way, some tidbits of information from all of us on the panel, and obviously the process of what you do at Homeppl, and more importantly, what's the extra bit of activity you do to detect fraud, and really what and has there been made a big difference with regard to right to rent? So that's another question we're going to throw on the back of that. So kick us off about what you guys do and how different you are to a normal referencing company.
Absolutely. So standard referencing, someone will ask you for maybe a copy of your right to rent document, relevant as you said, so passport or ID card, some kind of utility bill normally, and maybe a payslip or a bank statement, and you'll see money coming in. And unfortunately, the reality is that some of those documents are very easy to fake, whether that's a fake passport, if you're not entirely sure what you're looking for, or actually bank statements or payslips that someone has made on Photoshop. And that sounds like it would be easy to tell the difference, but actually it's very easy with Photoshop to change the number from a 13 to 130. And it looks 100% legit, but actually it isn't. So what we do is a few things which are really different. So we encourage tenants as much as possible to connect to open banking. So for anyone who doesn't know what that is, the government legislated so that banks had to allow you to share your data. And that means we can connect directly to someone's bank and see their income coming in, so who paid them, how much, how frequently, how long. So we can validate that they have the source of income that they really say that they do, but also that they're paying their rent. So if they say, hey, I was renting, here's the details of my previous landlord, we can see whether they're making those payments or they're not. So that's a big step forward from kind of a traditional, just looking at a payslip or a bank statement. The other thing that we do is some really interesting document analysis. So when someone sends us over a document, we can tell you whether it was created in Photoshop or it actually came out of a payroll software or a bank. So that's really, really critical to telling whether someone is who they say they are. But also the analysis that we do on references ourselves. So we say, okay, we want a reference from your employer, and then we can go out and we can say, is that employer legitimate? So how long have they been in operation? How long has their website been there? Is it real? And that's what it all comes down to. And we use all of that information to make a recommendation and say, hey, yes, this person is a good tenant, and they will be a good tenant to rent your property.
That's really, and of course the affordability. And then, Kristjan, on a letting agent's point of view, so obviously a lot of these guys here will use letting agents maybe for management or let only. And of course the reason why a landlord goes to a letting agent is they're going to get a better, decent tenant, okay? It says that on paper. Theoretically. We could argue the toss, obviously, but I know with regard to what you do and how you do it, and you're very passionate about what you do. Explain about the process that you do when you act for a landlord, when they're asking you, obviously, with regard to the reference. What's that journey like when you're obviously dealing with a tenant, and how you qualify them?
So, first of all, just to really back up what Rowan just said, we categorically support the use of specialist expert providers within the journey of letting out your property. So
tech, basically prop tech.
I mean, not always tech, but
Right.
but yeah. I mean, you know, there are certain things that Rowan just talked about, which to the average Joe, you know, we aren't document specialists. I don't know categorically, bizarrely enough, what every international passport in the
Looks
world
like, yeah, of course.
should look exactly like, to pick up a slight technical error. So, you know, that is why there is value in using the expertise and the particular technical knowledge of a company like Homeppl. Off the back of that, we will often recommend that our landlords look to indemnify themselves. As Paul alluded to, you know, if you do get a bad tenant and a fraudulent tenant, you know, they do know the game, they do know the loops to make a process drag out. We are also transitioning into a marketplace where in the next 12 to 24 months, Section 21 will no longer exist.
So referencing
So-
will be much more stringent.
Exactly. So the ability to get rid of a difficult to fraudulent tenant will, in theory, be more complicated because you won't have a Section 21 to potentially help facilitate exiting that tenancy agreement earlier. We strongly recommend our landlords look at rent warranty and legal expense products.
And do you want to explain what that is? Just some people that
So
don't know.
most insurance providers or most referencing companies will offer this as an add-on product, or you can sometimes find them independently, but you need to have a reference from an approved contractor. And basically what that is an insurance that if they pass certain credit checks, they will indemnify and insure you against loss of rent should that tenant either fraudulently or unintentionally be unable to pay, whether they lose their job or intentionally stop paying. Most companies will cover you for at least 6 months' rent. In most areas of the market, I think, not to name a competitor of yours, but I think Good Lord have just announced that actually they've done an indefinite policy, which is the first in the market.
And they pay the legal fees of eviction.
They all have different pros and cons, but most of them come with a rent protection, so your rent is guaranteed, provided they pass the credit checks, and also a legal expenses warranty to cover the typical legal expenses of gaining vacant possession for your property. Now, at the end of the day, only you as a landlord will know what your margins are. We talked about London average rent being £2,000. So your average rent in London is £24,000 a year. Your average rent warranty product is about £200 for a year's cover. They're not expensive
Bit of a
products.
no-brainer.
So in London, it's an absolute no-brainer. I can appreciate if you're maybe in, regional Wales and you're getting £250, £300 a month for a property with all your other considerations, it's a juggle. But absolutely a product that we recommend all of our landlords, and in fact legally as letting agents and managing agents, we're legally obligated to make sure that our landlords are aware that those products are available. And most referencing companies that agents use will use a company that offers that product. We, as an agency, have always shared our reference reports with our landlords. Some agents don't. I would advise a landlord you should always, if they use an external third party, you should always ask to see a reference report.
Because essentially, on that point, the decision is your decision as to what your profile, and you're putting a jigsaw together. The agent can recommend, but at the end of the day, that decision is with you. And we've all come across agents where all they're fighting for is their commission, and they got let only, and they've got their self-interest. But I think where landlords go wrong as well is they don't understand what a referencing report is, and that's part of the problem, isn't it, Kristjan?
And most good reports will set that out. It will set out quite clearly. Some agents might try and throw GDPR at you as a reason of why you can't see that report. It's utter nonsense. Most reports don't actually disclose sensitive information. They just show what they have done in due diligence to make sure that tenant is safe. And most tenants within a holding deposit agreement will agree for that report to be shared with all necessary parties anyway. So any agent throwing around GDPR. I would caution, some agents do references internally for, again, the reasons Rowan's already highlighted. I would caution that approach just because fraudsters are getting very clever. In a digital environment, in a digital landscape, tools that 20 years ago only sort of criminal enterprises would have had access to, you can now get on your phone in a £2 app. So the kind of technical access that people have to document, to doctor documents rather, and make fraudulent documents is very, very easy. So yeah, I think it's all about expertise where it's needed, but a quality referencing and insurance product, is gonna protect you from 98% of your liability in this area.
Thank you. Fair. And then, Rich, just before I come to you, because obviously you're a very hands-on landlord, been doing it 20 years, you represent the NRLA. Your landlords here, how many of you actually use a referencing company? Put your hands up, please. Okay. And the other guys here, you all landlords, do you just do the referencing yourselves? Put your hands up. Right. And the other people? Open rent. Yeah. So, right. Yeah. So open rent's an online. They're actually clients of ours. We run My Deposits, so they do the deposit. So open rent is an online platform. do-it-yourself landlord, and they offer referencing, and it's all digitalised. Richard, what do you do about, do you meet the tenants as part of that process, get the gut feeling? What other tidbits do you do?
I think that's vital. I mean, just to mention on GDPR, I think as landlords we should be registered with the ICO and have a privacy notice so that there's no problem about you handling data. And, if you're told by an agent you can't have the reference because of data issues, then you can show them you've got your own privacy policy. I don't know how you can run a lettings business really without dealing with data. So really you should have your own privacy policy, and the NRLA can help with that.
Yeah, good point.
The other thing I was going to say, yes, is gut feeling is quite important. I mean, we need to be careful because we don't have to be discriminatory, of course, and sometimes your gut feeling can be discriminatory because you're dealing with a type of person that you're not used to dealing with. So it's important to have that in the back of your mind. I'm conscious that a third of calls to our advice line, the NRLA advice line, are about agents, problems that people are having with agents. And, there are good agents and there are some not so good agents. And sometimes I worry that agents are more worried about their commission, or certainly the negotiator is, and, just wants to make sure that they give you a tenant ASAP. So whenever I use an agent for let only, I will always meet with the applicant, and I think that's vital. I think referencing is a small part of the process. Yes, it says that the tenant has jumped out through these hoops, but I then want to meet the tenant and get a feel for what's going on. And I always ask them some key questions. The biggest problem I've ever had is subletting. So I'll always ask open questions of my applicants. So who's going to live at the property? Not the agent says that it's just going to be you and your wife and 2 children. No, don't ask that, because that's a leading question. The tenant's just going to say, yes, it's going to be me, my wife and 2 children. You need to ask open questions like who's going to live there. Now, the ones that look at me gone out and think, why the hell are you asking me that? Because I've made it perfectly clear who's going to live here. They're the ones that I know are going to be okay. It's, the ones that start to sort of spin a bit of a tale or say, oh, actually, my girlfriend might move in, or, it's really interesting if you sort of build up a bit of a rapport with the tenant or the applicant and ask them some open questions and just get a feel for what's going on. Ask them how they've got on with landlords in the past. Can they talk to you about where they've lived before? I've even met applicants sometimes at their current place where they live, so that I can see how they're living at the moment. And if they refuse to let you do that, then that might also tell you something. So getting a really good feel. And I think also doing an induction at the start of the tenancy, so meeting them yourself and handing over the keys yourself and going through the inventory with them yourself. Building, I think, that personal relationship with your tenant is the most valuable asset in your business, because once the tenant knows you as a person, they're much less likely to maliciously damage the property, I think. And I'm somebody that's really in favour of that direct relationship with the tenant. One of the times when I had most problems with my tenants was when I got an assistant to manage the portfolio. And sadly, a few of them started playing up a bit like kind of naughty adolescents, because they wanted direct contact with me, and it's really taught me to value that a lot. I appreciate it's not always possible. Sometimes you have to use an agent, and we would say at the NRLA, if you do, make sure they're members of Property Mark, or Safe Agent, or one of the recognised bodies.
Yeah, thank you. Good. I think what is important, and I think there were some really good gold nuggets in what was said there. I think it depends where you are on your property journey. So you could live obviously quite away from your property, and quite rightly using an agent, and how you qualify that agent is a whole different process and a whole different system, because I can talk about, I represent the property redress scheme. There's 2 redress schemes out there. One's the property ombudsman, one is the property redress scheme. We have over 16,000 members, agent members. 25% of complaints about letting agents are about poor communication and service. But I remember one case which actually featured on our programme, where we made an award against the letting agent for £10,500 because he put a subletting scammer in the property, and we proved that the referencing was false. The landlord proved that the referencing was false, and on the back of that he got paid out, and there was redress, and that's really good, and there will be a lot of redress. So this moves me on to the type of scams that are out there, and I've seen them really, really evolve. Going into a property, especially in the centre, of town, that's how Kristjan and myself met. We met each other on the circuit, but we did a TV programme called Inside Out London, and I have a bee in my bonnet about subletting scams, so I expose it quite a lot on my programme and another programme. And I remember, and can I ask you, how many of you do short-term lets on Airbnb? If you put your hands up, anyone? You do as well. So obviously there's a 90-day rule. That's been put up for quite a bit of abuse. But we had a case, didn't we, Kristjan, where you came to Landlord Action and we assisted you. Do you want to just talk about that case? Because Airbnb, just before Kristjan explains it, I remember doing an interview with Richard Quest at CNN in 2013 when Airbnb more or less started. And he said, what's your thoughts on Airbnb? And obviously it came from America. And I said, it'll be good for landlords, they'll make some money, but it'll be up for major abuse, especially when you're renting in blocks. And there's obviously a lot of abuse with regard to breach of your head lease. And there's a big problem with that. And I basically called it, and we have an issue. And we went on a meeting with the Short Stay Association, and Airbnb weren't interested, were they, Kristjan? Whereby you have a tenant, you rent to a tenant, and then what he does or she does, they stick it on Airbnb, and Airbnb will not qualify if that tenant has the consent to sublet, and it's up for major abuse. And we do, I reckon, say at the moment, I can think of maybe 5 to 10 cases that I know of through my staff, and we do hundreds of cases at a time that are on Airbnb and sublets it, and it's a big problem. So maybe you can explain what happened.
Yeah. So to give the background of the case, we got approached, 2-bedroom used property in Bloomsbury, just shy of £3,000 a month in rent. We got approached by 2 very professional presenting ladies, both of whom were entrepreneurs. One of them had 2 businesses, another one had a single business. Combined income just from those businesses was about £150,000 a year. So, we did all of our diligent reference checks like we would normally do, and on paper, perfect. I actually had personally met them at the property at the viewing originally. They came across, as very sharp, savvy businesswomen. And we looked forward to what we thought was going to be a typical tenancy. And we moved them into the property, and for the first 3 to 4 months, that's what we thought we had. The rent was paid on time. We went and did our first quarterly inspection. The property was immaculate. That did raise a couple of questions in that they did say, most of our tenants are actually happy for us to just say, we're going to come in next week on this day at this time. Are you fine? And most of our tenants are absolutely not a problem. Crack on.
Inspection, you're talking
with an interim inspection, yeah. And so this is where we started to sort of have a couple of red flags. Because first of all, they said, right, well, we need a very specific time, and you're not to enter the property. We will meet you at the property, and you can only go in once we're there. And you are not allowed to look inside any of the cupboards in the property. You're not allowed to go inside the kitchen cupboards. You're not allowed to look inside the wardrobes, because those are our personal effects and blah, blah, blah. Now, look, some people are particular. There are strange and peculiar people out there. There's 4 of them sat in this panel. So
I'm definitely the strangest.
You can't read too much into these things. But as an agent, red flags were going. And what actually made us aware, what was brought to our knowledge was, actually we went down for an inspection, and we did that inspection. The tenant left, and whilst our member of staff was still there writing up his notes, the tenant in the flat above stuck his head out the window and went, "Are you the agent for downstairs?" And he was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Can I come down for a chat?" And so he came down, and then he recanted the nightmare that Muse had faced for the last 4 months.
And when we did the filming, he came down again, and he got interviewed on camera,
he did.
didn't he?
But basically what had gone on is they had made that Muse lives hell. They were renting that property out to anyone and everyone, typically stag do's and birthday parties on a weekend, who were turning up, using it as an absolute party pad. Anyone who came out of a house and asked them to be quiet, they were typically quite aggressively told to remove themselves. It's the polite version of the language that was used.
Before the watershed, sorry.
It was reported to Camden Council. I have no idea what they had done with that information, but they hadn't made any effort to get in contact with us. And they would have known who we were because we'd done a property licence historically on the property.
But were they? Can I ask you? And we touch on to the referencing straight after. Were they their original names, or were they fake names?
They were perfectly legitimate people. They were totally legit. They hadn't defrauded us in terms of their references, but they had defrauded us in terms of their intent.
Correct.
Now, by subletting the property, they were in breach of the landlord's mortgage. They invalidated his building's insurance. They were breaching property licensing rules. They were obviously making everyone on that street's lives an absolute living hell. They looked after the property perfectly well. You know, we got it back eventually.
They were letting it as like
it was in their interest to
Yes,
keep it immaculate. So we got it back immaculate. They paid their rent. But the point was they potentially could have caused issues for our landlord in a major way. But for us, what was really important was they were making neighbours' lives a hell, and that
Can I just flag up neighbours here, just very briefly? I know you want to bring in Rowan, but all of my neighbours have my contact details.
Your neighbours who eyes are
the
ears.
neighbours to all of my properties, and I have occasionally had a neighbour getting in touch saying that your tenant's playing loud music at night. Did you know your tenant's having parties? Those sorts of things. And
They're like your security.
with current
aren't they?
property licensing as well, you want that because you want them coming to you, not to the local council.
And just things like I still trim the hedges on quite a lot of my properties, and that's a great opportunity for chatting to the neighbours and just finding out what's going on.
They are your eyes and ears.
Yeah.
If you've got a cannabis factory or you've got 25 people living in it, I mean, I remember just before I started Landlord Action, when I met my old business partner, when I started 20 years ago, he had 25 illegal immigrants living in a 3-bed house in Edgware, and I got rid of all of them because I was doing evictions, and that's how the idea of Landlord Action came. We did fixed fees and a free advice line, and if you've got a neighbour and you see people coming and going, it was so bad when we went in, there was literally mattresses, and they would queue in the morning to go and brush their teeth and go to the toilet.
But I mean, we've had various experiences of that. I mean, obviously there was the one that we had. Now, I think what astonished me, having not dealt with the short-let market, was Airbnb's categorical refusal to do anything.
Yes.
They wouldn't take the property off Airbnb. They wouldn't cancel the bookings on Airbnb, even though we proved we sent them a copy of the tenancy agreement. We sent them a copy of the mortgage terms, the building's insurance. Now, Airbnb had a court ruling about 2 years ago in the European Court where basically they got sidestepped from the regulation that us as letting agents have to comply with because they are not a letting agent. They are merely a portal
But just
or a
on that point,
facilitator.
I tried to get the Short Stay Association, which was hotel.com, holidaycop.com. I tried to get them to join the property redress scheme, so it was redress, and they just didn't want to know.
They genuinely don't care. And it was horrendous. And I think, like I said, they kept on paying, but they refused to surrender because they were making a lot of money out of subletting the property.
Correct.
I think it ended up costing our client about $3,000 to regain,
and then obviously when we were filming, we put them under pressure. We got them on the phone. You could hear us filming. So it was on. When was it? A couple of years ago, wasn't it, or something?
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago. But I mean, we caught them out nicely, didn't we? Because the point was, we would call them out on it, and they would go, "No, the neighbours are lying. We're living at the property. What are you talking about? Prove it." And then we'd go, "Okay, well, short of camping outside your property, because we can't go into a property without a tenant's consent." But we caught them out nicely on the programme because I literally called the tenant. We knew there was someone staying in the property.
There was an American family coming on holiday.
We arrived, knocked on the door, met the family, understood the guest, closed the door, and then we called the tenants on the phone live on air and said, we understand we've got a report that there's a family living in the property. And they said, absolutely categorically not. I'm in the property right now. And we just went, that's interesting, because when we just knocked on the door, an American family answered and said they were what do you mean? At which point Paul took over the phone conversation.
So I had some choice words. But just on that, I mean, look, with Airbnb and subletting, it's in their interest to stay in the property as long as possible. It's the same when we're looking when properties are brothels. We have lots of. I don't frequent brothels, by the way. I just thought I'd make that out there. But we do a lot of evictions when it comes to brothels, and there's generally they will stay in the property as long as possible.
Well, I would estimate they were making £3,000 to £4,000 profit.
They were making a fortune, making a fortune.
But just that one flat.
But Rowan, coming to you, and I wanted that case study because we actually lived through it. What, how and what? I mean, I'm not saying Kristjan would have done his referencing, seen everything, whatever. Maybe the game has changed with regard to referencing for 2-3 years ago.
Open banking would have probably helped.
And that's what I was going to say. We talk about open banking. What would that have flagged it?
Yeah, so if you've got someone like in this instance, it's probably not the only property that they were renting out.
No, we found at least one, if not two, other Airbnb listings, and they would have still had a home.
Cleaning up, it's easy money.
If they connect to their open banking, you're going to see, instead of income that they say is coming from whatever business they say that they have, you're going to see income coming in from Airbnb. And there's no way to fake that in your open banking because that's a direct connection with someone's bank. So the tenant doesn't get an opportunity to make any edits to it. It's their actual bank transaction history. So that's where you would pick those kind of things up. We've also seen quite a few cases where the company that someone declares they're working for and is paying them a salary, when you look into it, is actually
An Airbnb
hosting company.
Yeah.
So
One question. If the landlord's paid for the reference, then, would you supply, if the landlord asked you for the supporting information that was submitted for the tenants to verify who they are and their income, would you provide a copy of that to the landlord?
So we work directly with letting agents and build-to-rent companies, but we would expect them to provide the report through to the landlord, which gives you all the information about where that income was coming from. So in the event that you had someone who said, I'm a solicitor, and then when you open up their open banking, you can see that they're making all their money from subletting, there'd be a report that's failed that says, hey, their income is not what they say it is.
Typically, the personal documents will be covered by GDPR.
Yeah.
And tenants won't want bank statements and so on and so forth to be banded around between parties.
So the letting agent might have access to those, but generally they wouldn't be shared on, but you get a recommendation.
GDPR, if you've got the privacy rules in place for yourself as a landlord, are you able to demand them?
With it, demand is maybe a strong word. I mean, at the end of the day, as a landlord, you can set whatever criteria you want, as long as you're not being discriminatory, as long as it is uniform. I think you just have to... my advice is always put yourself in your tenant's shoes, and how would you feel if the shoe was on the other foot? If they've already been taken through a very stringent referencing process by a professional company, and then get asked to provide a host of other documents, as a tenant, I would be like, hold on a minute, why have I just gone through that referencing process? So I would say typically I would put your tenant through one or the other. If you're using a quality referencing provider, they are culpable for what they do. Now, you do need to be careful. Some referencing companies have some very loose terms and conditions where their culpability is actually quite poor. But where you have that culpability, and what we've already touched on, is rent warranty products. And as soon as that comes into play, you'll find referencing companies providing those products they will have a definitive line, because they will have an agreement with an insurance partner that they have to meet that sort of risk.
But not all of those will see rent statements, will they? That's the important thing. And I think I've certainly asked for bank statements in the past when I've been a little bit concerned.
But open banking
does, which is fabulous.
I think this is a really good question, because my advice, I mean, I've done a talk on how to avoid a bad tenant for years, and you've talked about the right to rent, and how's that changed things. You've talked about previous landlord issues, an issue where you've got his previous landlord, but it's his mate Mickey down the pub, who's done and they're, how do you qualify that? Can you see the previous tenancy agreement? Have you seen utility bills from where they're currently renting? Do you do a land registry search for £3 to find? I mean, there's so much stuff that you can do to back things up. The referencing process cannot be rushed, and I'd rather the property be empty for another 3, 4, 5, 6 days. Is that right? So you get the right person. The biggest problem that one sees, and I've seen it so many times, is you get desperate landlords.
Once they're in, they're in.
Once they're in, okay, and they can play the game. I think can I just ask a question to Rowan again, and then I've got something else I want to open up, is do all referencing providers, and if anything comes out of this, and I want everyone to look at their referencing process, because you are looking at a credit agreement. Your credit agreement is a 6 or 12-month tenancy agreement. And like you said, once you're in, and we know what the court systems are like, right? You need to look at that. And if you use a referencing provider, Does every referencing provider now generally all use open banking?
No.
So what's the percentage that use open banking?
I can
And
think of 3 that I know of
should
off
the
the top of my
landlord
head.
say, do you use open banking?
I think open banking is a great thing to push for, because it's sorry.
No. I
Go
was
on.
just going to add, tenants always have the right of refusal of open
do.
banking.
They do, right. So is that a red flag?
Not necessarily. There is nothing wrong with a tenant being private.
But I'm a
again,
landlord.
You have to find that balance.
I understand that, but I'm a landlord, okay? I've got my property. I might have had poor experience in the past. Tenant demand is very strong, and you'll confirm that, Kristjan, and so can you, Richard. You've got, the key is to all of this, you have to pick your tenant. Your tenant shouldn't pick you. Be very, very clear about this, okay? So you've got your various people, and you shouldn't be discriminatory and all that type of stuff. But all you're doing is you are putting together a jigsaw. But actually their past is really, really important for you to make that decision. So I would, before open banking, I used to say, get 3 months bank statements. You'll see when they get paid, how much they get paid, have they paid their 3 months spent, have
A
they
lot of
got
agents
utilities,
demand 6
have they
month
got
bank statements.
that's fine, but have they got a gambling problem online? I want to know about it, And you do. I used to be a private investigator, so that's still in me. And landlords have to still be private investigators. You can't be solely reliant on a letting agent. You can ask them to make a recommendation. At the end of the day, the property's yours, right?
The important thing, I think, as well, is that moment when the tenant is the applicant is hungry.
So they're telling you what you want to hear.
Yes. No, not necessarily. If I think about the last property I let in Hackney, 2-bed flat, this couple really, really loved the flat and they really, really wanted it. And I probably could have asked them for anything, because they were, and that, in a way, it was a good sign that they were willing to provide anything that I asked them for. And so that's a moment where you can be quite, I take your point totally, Kristjan, you don't have to over-demand stuff.
You've got to find that balance.
You've got to find the balance, but there is that moment when they will be willing to show you whatever you want. And people often talk about things like national insurance numbers, driving licence numbers, and so on, so that you can find them if they abscond and so on.
We do tenant tracing. We have a debt recovery department in Landlord Action. I have a whole team that do it. I totally agree with you, Richard. There is a point, there's a window when you're doing the application process. You've done your viewings. I'm not going to be rushed. This is my terms of business. I'll come back to you. The tenant will offer information, so that you have to be clever with it. So for argument's sake, I've just relocated from London, from Manchester. I've got a job, okay. And then you start talking about their situation, their work placement. And actually, they own a property in Manchester. What's that property? I want to know it. I want to write it down. You've got to be clear and precise with the information at that point, because 6 to 12 months down the line, you'll forget. One little bit of information is really important. Getting a next of kin. People forget about getting next of kin. The amount of landlords that have come to me and said, I'm an next of kin, but my tenant's in prison, or they've done a run, or I've had, heaven forbid, I've had tenants that have died in property and you don't know who to contact. It's really important. But the next thing I want to... God, that was a bit grim. I do apologise, right? But moving on, one thing there is a problem is... you've got the open banking, and I think with the referencing games is changing. We're talking about lifetime deposits, we were talking about rental passports, all that type of stuff. Do we think, and is it going to happen and going to come in, and this is a question for all you guys, that rent payments will, I know we have open banking, so it's a massive start, but will rent payments be linked to someone's credit file? Just like when we pay our credit card or
Well,
our
they already
mortgage
can
payment.
be.
It's already happening with Experian.
So you've already got
Yes.
credit landlord
Yes.
who partnered with
Yeah.
But is it
Experian.
happening widespread? That's the problem, because we want to get picked up.
Do you know a really interesting thing? We actually surveyed our tenants because we were willing to pay for that product.
Right.
Entirely at our own cost for the benefit of our tenants.
Right.
Because we have, in 17 and a half years, we've had 4 major rent arrears, and we've resolved 3 of those in-house.
Amazing.
And part of that is to do with our diligence of the referencing process, and part of it is about when things start going wrong, being a human, picking up a phone, having a chat. In most instances, obviously, we're talking today about fraud, and that is intentional. But for a lot of tenants who lose a job or split up with a partner or whatever, find themselves in an unforeseen circumstances, they don't want to be defaulting on your rent. And actually, the best thing you can do is just have a conversation like you would with your best mate or a member of your family if they were in the same situation, and just find the easiest and best and most moderate way to find a reasonable conclusion to that matter.
Okay.
I think the problem with it's really important, I think, to get rental payments on people's credit files. A, because it helps tenants get mortgages, because if there's more information there that lenders can see. And if a lender can see that someone's paying $1,500 a month rent, why can't they then pay $900 a month for a mortgage? I mean, we've really got to get lenders to change their attitudes around this. I think the biggest hurdle here, though, is not how do you get landlords to report rent payments into the system, and that's what I don't think experience.
That's my great. I tell you what, we should be on radio together. We have been on radio together because that was my next question. So that's a lovely, a seamless link into my next question. Just so hold that question. We're going to come back to that. Rowan, talk to us about, is it happening? Can it happen more? Because there is a big beneficial advantage for a tenant if they're good tenants. Let's be very clear. 95% of tenants, 98% of tenants are absolutely great. Okay, you might have a deposit dispute at the end, there might be whatever, but generally the rents are paid on time. Forget about COVID, but generally...
We are talking about less than 1%.
We're talking, the default rate up to COVID went up to 7% at its peak, but that was rent arrears and rent deferments and whatever. But is it going to happen more? Because that's surely got to be a good thing for a good tenant, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think you can see it in the open banking data now with rental payments, and I think that's something that some referencing companies like us can pick up during the referencing, but if we can find ways that that's not just happening for the tenants who are going through some referencing, but it's happening for all tenants, then that's a really big step forward to making sure that the right tenants are moving into properties. But the thing that I think complicates it a bit is generally credit checks only UK-wide, and a lot of the tenants coming into properties in London are from outside of the UK.
So how do you just, on that point, I'm just going to ask you, and then when it comes to thing, foreign national tenants, because we all come people, how does that work? Normally they pay 6 months in advance, they've got no banking history in the UK, so how do you deal with that?
Sure. So we will we'll look for their landlord, even if that landlord's based overseas. So we'll get a tenancy agreement, say they're renting in the States, we'll get a tenancy agreement, we'll try and validate that landlord. So ideally it's a letting agent in the States, and then we can run some analysis on their website and say, like, yes, this is a real letting agent and they're the right people to be providing a reference. So things like that.
Social media profiles.
Social media is really good to look up people.
Are they, even things like LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
This person
LinkedIn's
says that they're joining a company here in the UK. Okay, great. Can I find them? Have they changed their LinkedIn? Okay, they have.
Again, take that with a pinch of salt, because
Yeah.
think about your own LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
They won't all be
But as
perfectly up
part
to
of
date.
referencing, you're building a picture, and that's making sure that all the pieces in the picture add up together. And it's when you find something that doesn't quite link up with the other pieces, and that's when you look a bit harder and you find things that are maybe not what you want, and that's where you start to see these.
And I think that is good, because that's clearly been an issue, and obviously you get guarantors, or you might be renting to social benefit tenant, and getting a guarantor or a student or a new couple renting or whatever. So we come back to, I'm going to talk about rent to rent, guaranteed rent, my next question, about the issues and how that is, and I'm going to try and wise you up with my experience and so forth, and ask what the panel thinks. But Richard, you mentioned about there's no bad tenant register out there. Be very clear.
And there never will be.
And there never will. If I had a pound, I'm known as Mr. Eviction Guy, whether that's good or bad or whatever. I've been doing it 30 years, right? And I do a leading TV programme. If I have a pound for everyone saying, why is there no serial bad tenant register? I'll tell you the reason why. Because it creates more homelessness. I was on a government, I've done a lot of government working groups, and I was in a government working group before around about the time of the Deregulation Act. And I was on the panel when we were talking about rogue agents and rogue landlords, and there was a database, and I even talked about, I gave the idea about banning orders, 3 strikes and you're out, and all that thing. And I flippantly said around this whole table, what about a bad tenant database? And they looked at me as if they were going to kill me. Okay, it would never happen. Yeah. You have it in Australia. The nearest thing that you have to it is that, and it's a big problem, 80% of landlords, previous to COVID, I can tell you this now, will never, ever go for their rent arrears. So they might have gone to court, might have served a notice, or the tenant might have owed them money, they've left, or they might have got a possession order, got a money order, but they haven't enforced it. Yeah. Trying to trace a tenant is quite difficult. We talked about it downstairs, didn't we, about your issue. We use a tracing company, whatever. Debt lasts for 6 years. But now we're seeing due to COVID and a record amount of cases, and we've got some big cases of at least 12 months rent arrears where landlords can't ignore the 10, 15 grand. It would have been 5, 6 grand. They could have swallowed that and whatever, and it took 5, 6 months to get rid of a tenant, but now it's 8 months or whatever after serving notice. As a landlord, and I think, and we do fixed fees, so we charge £300, £400, £500 to get you and enforce a money order. We even offer a service where if a tenant's still in the property, you've got a possession order, you know the tenant's still in the property, but you need to apply for an eviction date. We do a thing called a warrant of control, where we get a county court bailiff to try and attempt to collect the money. Now, you've got more chance of winning the lottery on Saturday than a county court bailiff trying to collect your money, but for £300, the debt is a registered county court judgment. And actually, as landlords, you're doing something because it's affected their credit rating. It lasts for 6 years. Your tenant might want to buy a house in 3 years' time. Tenant circumstances change, but one thing you have done is that when they do leave and you do evict them, your next landlord knows that they've been evicted, because the worst thing that can happen to a landlord is, yes, there's all different types of tenants. Tenants that fall on hard times. There's tenants that have ignored their credit rating. There's tenants, serial bad tenants that go from one property to another. I've got a tenant that I evicted on 2 occasions. I exposed him on a programme called Inside Out. He affected 6 landlords over 7 years, cost him £148,000. I tracked him down, gave all the data to the police. The police did nothing. But at least if you enforce the money order, then the next landlord knows.
You could argue that we have a duty as landlords to CCJ tenants who are in serious arrears, and you can do it yourself. There's a course that the NRLA runs. I've done it myself. You can do it through money claims online and so on, or of course get the help of Paul and others. But yes, if we don't register those arrears as debts, then other landlords are not going to find out.
No, I mean, we actually had a case, as I highlighted, we've had 4 in 17 and a half years, looking after about 250 properties. We've only ever had 4 major rent arrears. 3 we reconciled all internally through voluntary agreements.
They want to use you now, don't you?
But we had 1 where that wasn't the case. And actually, interestingly, the landlord was willing to walk away because the deposit was forfeit, which covered 2/3 of his losses. And his attitude was, I'm just glad he's gone. And our dialogue with him at that time was, how does that help the next landlord? Because we knew in dealing with him that he had done the same thing to the previous landlord.
Yeah, on that point,
we offered to pay all the court costs.
Right.
We offered to undertake all of the court proceedings on his behalf,
Yeah.
and he still refused.
Yeah. So on that point, and this is really, really important, because buy-to-let, so when I started in 2000, you've been a landlord 20 years, so we've been doing it at the same time. I became a landlord after and whatever. The game, in 2003, buy-to-let went nuts, and it's doubled and so forth. Buy-to-let's become dog eats dog. You will get a landlord who's got a problem tenant, exactly what you just said, Mark, and he will pass the problem on to you. He doesn't care about you. He will give that tenant a good reference, and you will take it on board because you take what he says face value. But if you've done your referencing, open bank, this, that, whatever, you're being your detective and put it together, it is an issue. Now, we are running out of time. I want to just have a quick, forget about rent, just guaranteed rent to rent, just be very wary of it, okay? There's some great companies called Northwoods that do it. I expose dodgy rent-to-rent companies all the time, and just by chance, the series starts Wednesday a week, 27th the 6th series starts 27th. But the week after, I expose a dodgy rent-to-rent company. Just so happens to be down the road. A lot of them are in East London, dare I say, apologies.
No.
And I go into his office and he owes £10,000. He wasn't happy to see me. But there's a lot of rent-to-rent operators doing it, and we're talking with trading standards, a lot of stuff. You've got to be really, really wary of it. I want to just one bit of advice I'm going to ask you, and then I'm just going to open the questions up. We've only got 10 minutes. With regard to protecting yourself against tenant fraud, What's your top tip, each of you?
Yeah,
Richard?
I would say the periodic inspection is really important. If I haven't been to see a property for 6 months, I start to worry. I would always do an inspection 3 months, and I say it's the tenant's induction, I will be back in 3 months. Even if everything seems fine, you need to make sure you're going in there, even if you're just going in with the gas safety guy or whatever. And the other thing to mention is you can, of course, use contractors to be your eyes and ears. So if, as in Kristjan's case, they didn't want the agent to go in particularly, you can always ask your gas safety guy to count the toothbrushes in the bathroom and things like that, just to get a feel for what's going on.
Actually, really good point. Another one of our red flags with our guys was brought to us by a contractor.
And the good thing about gas safety is they can say they've got to go into every room just to check the radiators and stuff, know. Or when, I will say I need to check all of the plug sockets to do a visual inspection of them. And that means I can get into every room.
Professional laundry services.
Right.
Yeah, they flagged that.
Right, give me a quick top tip, please.
Meeting in person, like Richard said. I mean, as agents, we meet 98% of our tenants in person, and we do the diligent stuff, but there is also that spidey sense, that intuition that you develop as you do this more and more. And over the years, we have had tenants who on paper have looked perfect, but something hasn't sat right, and we've gone to a landlord and we've said, trust us, let us find you someone else.
Exactly. And actually, if something doesn't smell right, doesn't feel right, don't touch it. Don't be desperate landlords. I come across them all the time and end up being my clients, unfortunately, at Landlord Action. It's true. Yeah. Last tip, top tip.
Well, I would say this, right? But make sure you're getting a quality reference. It doesn't matter. It does matter who's doing your referencing, right? Speak to your letting agent, find out who's doing their referencing, and make sure that you're using someone ideally who will be getting open
Not
banking.
all referencing providers are equal.
Exactly.
And ask to see the report.
100%.
Even if an agent's done it.
Don't swallow what they say about you can't see the report. I've heard that so many times.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
I want to see the report. I've paid for it.
Yeah.
Because, of course, the tenant doesn't pay for it anymore because they're under the tenant fee ban. I've paid for it. Right, have we got any questions? Anyone got some questions? Hopefully we've swamped you with information. Yes. Do you want to... have we got a mic, please?
Yeah,
One second. No, here. That's it. We've got one. Lovely. Go on. Speaking to the mic, madam.
And afterwards, this lady here.
Thank you very much. There is a tenant not paying for 18 months already. During COVID, obviously we could not do anything, but before that, they were clever enough to be able to complain to the local authority that the property was not good condition. Right. But I was lucky enough to have all the pictures at the beginning, 4 months before I'm talking about, that it was a newly refurbished property. So I managed to prove to the council that it is not my fault, but they have intentionally, because I have all the evidence, intentionally they have damaged the property with mold and everything. Yeah. But problem with the court, initially we could not go to court, and now it's taking too long, and we are getting only the hearing dates, review, and all the other stuff. I cannot even remember what do they call. How do you make the process quick to get rid of those tenants?
Okay, you've asked 15 questions in one question.
I was quite quick, by the way.
And we are running out of time. I mean, I can answer all of them. Just briefly, how do you speed up the court process? Well, again, I have a magic wand, right? I've got loads. I mean, we've chatted before, and obviously we can help you at Landlord Action. You should have acted during COVID. You could have acted during COVID. You could have served notice. You could have issued court proceedings. We were doing it all the time, just getting in the queue, in the court queue. The problem you've got is I'd never heard of retaliation eviction before I gave evidence, and I'd only been doing it for 30 years and so forth. Tenants damage properties on purpose. That does happen. You need to get the inventory. Mould is a big problem where they don't obviously open the windows, condensation. So, I think we need to pick this up offline as to where you are with your court case.
And processes.
And documenting processes. And you would have learned, landlords make mistakes. You all make mistakes. It's about how you learn with them and don't repeat them, because they can be really, really costly. Next question.
This lady over here had a question.
Yes.
Thank you very much, panel members. Although I came in a bit late, I just wanted to find out there's something been mentioned about open banking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you mind perhaps explaining a bit?
Yeah,
more
Rowan,
about
do you want to
that
explain
kind of
just quickly what open banking is?
And
Yes.
Also, the second question is talking about getting an agent, letting agent,
Yeah.
or finding out the best one.
Okay.
Because
You do
we've
open
used
banking?
that.
Okay,
We
can
use that.
guys, can we make
use
it very
that.
Yeah, we'll
short?
keep
Because
it
I
short.
want to
We
make one more
use
question.
that.
Okay.
We use the agent, and
We're going to
still
answer your
in
question,
the-
madam. Don't worry, because I want to ask one more question from the lady at the back. So, quick answers, please.
Sure. Open banking is a thing that the government legislated, which allows you as a bank consumer to share your data with another provider. So as part of referencing, instead of providing payslips or bank statements, a referencing provider can just connect to a tenant's bank account and review all of their data over the past 11 months.
Just to be clear, as an individual, you won't be able to
exactly.
access the tenant's open
Yeah.
banking. It's only approved organisations
Exactly.
that can access that data. With regards to finding a letting
algorithms.
agent, the best piece of advice to give you is to make your search criteria as broad as possible. There is no one measure that tells you an agent is good. Okay, there is no one thing that will tell you an agent is categorically good. You need to look at a lot of things. So start with the basics. Are they compliant in terms of, are they a member of a CMP policy? Are they a member of an ombudsman scheme? And then are they a member of client money protection, which is legally required by law, property ombudsman, legally required by law, and are they a member of an organisation such as Property Mark? Again, being a member of Property Mark does not guarantee that they're a good agent, but it shows that they align with certain values. I would then look at reviews. Look online, look at multiple different review sites. Some review sites can be played to enhance an agent's reputation. So I would recommend reviews on sites like Google rather than
Not all
professional
agents?
review curations.
All agents? No?
No. Personally, I think the independent sources like Google are far more trustworthy than any curation site. And then look at
landlord testimonials.
maybe awards they've got, landlord testimonials, and then if you're seriously interested, ask them if you can speak to a couple of their clients. No good agent will have any problem introducing.
But I think
to
you
a
should
couple of
also go
landlords.
into their office and see what their terms of business is and go down.
Yeah, I mean, that's not always possible. I mean, 60% of our landlords don't even live in the UK. So walking into our office isn't that. But
I'm
get on
talking
a
these
video
guys.
call with
Yeah,
them. Get on a video call. A lettings, if you pick a good letting agent, it could be a lifelong relationship.
Yeah, it should
so
be.
Pick carefully. If you pick it right, it will last long.
Picking a letting agent, I can tell you this now, is one of the most important decisions that you will have to make with regard to renting your property out. Okay. Well, and yeah, I mean, you could.
Good luck.
And yeah, I mean,
If a landlord asked me that, I would never.
Yeah,
let
I
a
don't think that would
landlord
ever
see my
happen.
client
Right, one more question, please. The lady at the back.
Yeah,
I would never. Let
Yeah,
landlords
one
see
second. Yeah, lady at the back, please.
can you recommend a good referencing company?
Homeppl.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think we'd all be. I've been really impressed. We had a really good chat
I
yesterday.
mean, the
so
NRLA do tenant
Yes.
referencing as well, just to suggest other ones. And I think if you remember, it's something around about £24 to do a full check, which includes a credit check. And
At our
also,
agency, we also. Sorry, you finish.
Yeah, a credit check, employers check, and previous landlord check. So generally, I've used that. And they do send you a report which you can look at, which is quite comprehensive.
But
Our
I would
agency
say-
uses a company called Rent Profile,
Yeah.
which is again we consider one of the upper.
And
echelon of
actually,
referencing
ironically, we own about 10 different companies, and we own a referencing company called Tenant Verify, which is for the self-managed landlord. I would, out of all of this, if you were doing it yourself, for the sake of 20, 30, 40 quid, it's a complete and utter no-brainer. You know, you're talking about putting someone into your property and giving them credit. And then
I'd go one
knowing
step
about all that
further.
situation.
I choose them based not just off the reference, but off the quality of warranty that they offer off the back of that, and spend that.
Yeah,
150,
and get a
200
rent
quid.
guarantee.
'Cause
Right,
that's where the referencing
okay,
puts their money where
thank
their
you.
mouth is.
What, last question. Pardon? It doesn't matter, this chap can speak loud enough. Right, one more question and we have to wrap it up, please. Go on.
Who are the most respected rent guarantee insurance providers?
Well, I mean, look, there's Let Alliance, there's Homelet, there's
Alan Boswell Group.
Boswell
They
Group.
underwrite a lot of
Yeah.
other products,
Yeah.
so I would go to the Alan
They're
Boswell
quite,
Group.
and then
would be
if
my
for landlord insurance, which is protecting your properties for cannabis factories, flood fire, you can
Total
speak to.
landlord is great.
Yeah.
We do all the landlord insurance for Hamilton Fraser for the NRLA. We've been partners for years. We've got a stand downstairs. What's our stand number? I don't know what.
Can
the
I
turnover
just
is, but
say
anyway,
something?
you can
Can
come
I
and see
just
me
say
anyway.
I don't
Okay.
do rent insurance, because I think if you're worried enough about the tenant to have to get rent insurance, then they're probably not the right tenant. So I'm quite strict with myself about not getting rent insurance.
But you're able to be very personal, hands-on.
Yeah, that's
A
true.
lot of
yeah,
landlords don't have the ability to meet their tenants, don't inspect properties themselves.
Okay, yeah.
Right, last thing. Have you learnt something from today's talk? Yes, good. That's the whole point.
He sounds
Thank
angry,
you.
so I hope you have.
Thank you.